Hello, my name is Miranda Washington, and I'll be speaking on psychology of elite athletes for Kines 443. Hello, my name is Miranda Washington, and I'll be speaking on psychology of elite athletes for Kines 443. Listed are a few topics that I want to talk about. Not going to list them all, but athletic identity is really big, coping, mental toughness, imagery, just to list a few. Athletic identity. So most athletes will identify with an athletic identity. Um, it's very important to know that elite athletes have a stronger athletic identity than a non-elite um, athlete. Um, so factors to look for: compartmentalization is basically when they separate their sport life from their personal life. Justify commitment is basically justifying why they spend more time working out and training than maybe going out or, having some fun time. Setting sport goals. People with an athletic identity are who identify in that way. Usually set goals to work towards. They have rituals and routines. Um, a lot of people pay attention to them. They have fans. Um, one thing to really know, elite athletes um, show more commitment than a non-elite athlete. And also people who identify as athletic, people who identify with an athletic identity, they are at great risk for emotional and psychological damage. At a certain time of the year, elite athletes may be consumed with training and competition at almost 75% of their time. Increasing the chance of success is usually related to how an elite athlete handles challenges and pressure. So, the better they are at handling challenges and pressures in a positive way, it increases their chance of success. Elite sports have been indicated as a potentially stressful environment for an athlete, since factors such as injuries, pressure of competition and coach, anxiety, and high training loads can influence the sport's performance and success of the athlete. Here are just some pictures of what's considered an elite athlete, which is basically those good enough to go to the Olympics or perform at that level, and those who play professional sports. The difference in sports categories. So there's an open sports category and there's a closed sports category. The open category, football, basketball, badminton, among other things, where these are just a few. So it's considered open because the athlete has to adapt to the environment or external um, things that affect the way they play. So it's always changing. It's never constant, and their decision making is never going to be the same. Closed, there's shooting, archery, gymnastics. You can say golf. These are more constant, more predictable, stable, and the only thing that could affect an athlete in a closed sport will be themselves, based on their actions and their consistency of practice. So football, for example, they have to play in snow, rain, heat versus shooting or archery. Maybe even gymnastics, their environment will be the same almost every time. This is just a picture to show you the difference between open and closed. So although there are a lot of still audience, spectators, and whatnot, as far as the athlete themselves, let's look at the open. Drew Brees has to worry about not only himself, but he has to worry about his blockers. He has to worry about the opponent. And not only that, just the weather in general, because he's outside. On the other hand, Gabby's basically just herself. Okay, when looking at stress tolerance, you must know that stress affects attentional focus, motor coordination, and decision making. Reactive stress tolerance um, basically says that you have to be quick and accurate when you're reacting, or like your ability to react to a stressful situation. Um, so assessing how the athlete's ability to remain focused and respond accordingly is what's looked at when they're faced with a stressful situation. 3 factors related to how an athlete responds would be gender, so that would be male and female. The sports type, as I spoke on earlier, would be the open and closed aspect of it. And the competitive level would be elite, just because that's my topic. Positive effects on elite athletes would be their coaches, parents, even the media, other factors as well, but I just wanted to speak on uh, basically the ones that they will probably come into contact with on a daily basis. So their parents, their coaches, sometimes their coaches are looked at as father figures, father, mother figures, when the parent isn't there, or um, they come to them for advice. I mean, coaches can basically do a lot of things for the athlete. Media gives the athlete a sense of satisfaction and self-confidence, just because they uplift the athlete and report the things that they do positive, which in return the fans show more support. Satisfaction basically is related to the human experience. So it shows through their characteristics, the effort that they put forth, um, how they feel about themselves and their sport. Satisfaction is also reached through media, if I didn't say that earlier. Um, Autonomy is also considered aspect of satisfaction, which the coach should give the athlete, uh, along with feedback, positive feedback, and just support in general. Again, just like coaches, parents, and media can be a positive effect on an elite athlete, they can also be um, negatively affected um, by their coaches, parents, and the media. Um, Media report scandals, they report arrests, they report um, if you play poorly in a game, they report your injuries. So 9 times out of 10, if an athlete is very sensitive about their injury and try or maybe this another situation like misconduct, sexual abuse was a thing in the Olympics. If the media keeps reporting things like that, that triggers something in the athlete um, and brings upon negative effects. Coping for elite athletes. So, resilient profile is psychological characteristics that explain favorite responses. It's basically, let's see, the bottom line: self esteem, optimism, commitment, coachability. So, these will be the characteristics that an elite athlete should have. 9 times out of 10, they do have them, and they have a very good understanding um, about where they want to be and um, their personality traits. All of these are a part of their resilient profile. Problem focused responses is just the way that the athlete deals with stress. And it helps them increase their ability to cope with certain situations. Um, so, in doing coping exercises or coping strategies, this just helps them build on that profile, and it also helps them learn to cope with situations. The article that supplied me with this information um, says volleyball players, but it can be applied to any athlete, really. To continue speaking on coping, fear, sadness, and joy are pre-wired communications, which are said to be innate, which basically means a natural response. Um, Emotions can be affected, can affect the emotional state, and in return influence cognitive function. Positive emotions um, result in efficiency. So basically, if you have a positive way of thinking and a positive way of coping, in return, you'll increase your efficiency to respond to um, stressors in a efficient manner. Negative emotions interfere with people's capacity to process data. Um, so basically, your thinking will be negative and it'll just affect the way you process information. Uh, There are several ways to deal with coping. Avoidance coping is one of them, where you withdraw from a stressful situation or you engage in another behavior or psychological manner to an alternative task. Emotional focus coping regulates emotions um, in a stressful situation. Problem solving coping and emotional focused coping, when looked at a study, elite athletes versus non-elite athletes, it was said that elite athletes used problem-solving coping more than um, non-elite athletes. Primary appraisal is just a transaction of oneself. Secondary appraisal is just the ability of a person to cope. This is just diagrams and pictures of some ways to cope. So, environmental demand, individual perception of the environmental demand, stress response, and behavioral consequences, um, adaptive coping, maladaptive coping, and emotional focus. So, these are just things to mentally tough individuals or elite athletes would have these characteristics. Um, they should already have a good sense of most of these. Um, I'm not going to read through all of them, but these are just a few. Definitions I thought that were important: competence, autonomy, and relatedness. Competence is just the need to interact. Autonomy is being in charge of oneself. Relatedness is feeling connected and caring for someone, and someone else caring for you. Motivation is a key aspect of being an elite athlete. You have to have um, motivation in order to encourage yourself to keep pushing. If you don't have this, you will be struggling in the future. Most elite athletes, like I said before, have a lot of characteristics that they need to be where they are, or they wouldn't be there. Um, Giving an elite athlete a sense of autonomy increases their positive behavior and psychological well-being. So them having the feeling of being in charge of their own life, their own feelings, their own choice making, gives them satisfaction, like I spoke on earlier. 4 stages of motivational sequence, according to the self-determination theory, um, was autonomy, support, and this is a domino effect. So if you give the athlete autonomy, in return, the need for satisfaction will be satisfied. They will be happy, um, and then in return, they will be motivated to continue. And if all of this works out, their well-being, um, they'll have a great well-being. Sports injury is a big deal when dealing with elite athletes, because this can make or break the athlete. And speaking on that is where their characteristics and their motivation and everything will come into play. Um, so if they're struggling with um, that aspect of coping, or things like that, then suffering from a sports injury would be uh, increased, simply because which is the first line. Suffering a sports injury should not only be related to a particular mechanism of injury, overtraining, nutrition, or pain, but also you must take into consideration pain tolerance, motivation, social pressures, and eating disorders, among other things. The rehabilitation process is very important. Not only do you help the athlete get back to being functional, but this is where you teach them how to cope with their stress, how to look at whatever they're dealing with in a positive manner, and just try to fix their characteristics. Um, Imagery is very important in the rehabilitation process. Most of the time in rehabilitation, they'll use the pain management imagery, um, just because the athlete in the beginning would most likely have pain. There are 5 types of imagery listed, and in the next slide, I'll be mentioning a study done. continuing the rehabilitation process. There are three phases: the early phase, mid phase, and final phase. This is just appropriate for the study that was done to see which imagery technique an elite athlete would use. So in the early phase, the elite athlete used pain and healing management imagery. So basically, he saw himself pain free, he saw himself healed, um, and in return, it'll build confidence, it'll get rid of the pain. Um, and then we move on to the mid phase. The athlete then used the cognitive specific imagery, which is more motor skill. And in the final phase, the athlete used the he used CS again, so cognitive specific, which was the motor skill, and then he used the cognitive general imaging, which is just basic imaging strategies. These are just pictures of ways to manage stress. Also, being that elite athletes invest a lot of time in their sport, they can be susceptible to burnout, which is why I put it in my PowerPoint. So you invest this much time and it doesn't turn out exactly how you expected it to be. You didn't win the championship you always wanted to win. You weren't a gold medalist like you planned to be. And it just all seems like the personal investment is less than the or is greater than the sport experience. So all of the time you invested doesn't even equal up to what you got out of the sport. Continuing burnout, there are a few things that you should know. So there are levels of extrinsic motivation. Um, I have bolded the key aspects of what it means to have that type of extrinsic motivation. So um, let's see, integrated regulation. I bolded personal outcomes. So basically, you're doing this because you want to do it. Um, Whereas, let's see, identified regulation, you're doing it, but it's not because you want to, it's because it needs to be done. And I highlighted health because, a lot of people exercise for their health, but not because they want to, you know.